You underestimated me, Officer Simmons. Mona Lisa's smile caught Officer Simmons off guard, a man who was fake and deceitful in front of the law. In a small town, inside a courtroom heavy with tension, Mona Lisa Jackson, a black woman with a quiet demeanor, was accused of resisting and assaulting a white police officer, Bradley Simmons. Under the indifferent stares of the public and the smug satisfaction of the local law enforcement system, Mona Lisa looked like a disruptive criminal who deserved to be prosecuted. However, paper cannot wrap fire. Mona Lisa was about to prove to everyone that she was innocent, a victim of discrimination simply because of her skin color. The story will keep you listening. Tell me which state you're from, and leave a comment below. The heavy courtroom door creaked open slowly, dragging out a long, reluctant groan, as if it, too, didn't want to witness what was about to unfold. Mona Lisa stepped in, her hand gripping her handbag tightly, her shoulders straight, her gaze sharpened like it had been honed through 1,000 battles. Inside, hundreds of eyes locked onto her. Some frowned, others whispered to their neighbors, children stared wide-eyed over the wooden railing, some people just observed quietly with that familiar, emotionless gaze. Mona Lisa could feel the weight of the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on her. The courtroom, with its towering walls and ancient stone columns, seemed built more to crush anyone who dared to challenge the system than to uphold justice. Her footsteps echoed on the polished wooden floor, each step a subtle statement within the somber symphony of the room. She knew that here, she was not presumed innocent until proven otherwise. She clung to one thought. Sometimes fighting for your rights in your own country makes people forget you are a citizen too. Near the defendant's table, Mona Lisa sat down, resting her hands lightly on her thighs, palms open, as if releasing her trust into the coming battle. Across the room, Officer Bradley Simmons was adjusting his uniform. He sat straight, shoulders wide, with a smug smile masked beneath a polished facade. To Simmons, this was just another easy win, another chance to reinforce the belief that this nation always trusted the man in uniform, even when the truth was far more troubling. Mona Lisa knew exactly how confident Simmons felt. She had seen men like him on the battlefield, the ones who led with arrogance, blind to the dangers hiding just beneath the surface. Outside, autumn sunlight spilled through the window frames, scattering golden streaks across the wooden floor, lighting up faint hopes amid the suffocating air. And Mona Lisa, surrounded by suspicion and prejudice, sat still, like a warrior waiting for the moment to strike. She didn't need anyone to save her. She was ready to stand alone, because she knew the truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs one person brave enough to fight for it. Officer Bradley Simmons smugly adjusted his tie before settling at the prosecution table. He was used to soft-spoken court sessions, to journalists with blunted pens, to a public willing to believe that a man in uniform could do no wrong. What Simmons didn't realize was that the quiet woman across the hall had survived 4 hellish seasons in the harshest SEAL missions. In his eyes, Mona Lisa was just another ordinary woman with no remarkable background, a woman ready to be judged the easiest way, by her skin color and by suspicion. In those first moments of the trial, Simmons thought to himself with satisfaction, "This will be another easy win." But he failed to understand one thing. A warrior never reveals their true hand before the real battle begins. Mona Lisa sat there, calm and steady, like someone steering into the storm, wearing a barely noticeable smile, half peaceful, half challenging. This fight would be nothing like what Simmons expected. It would be a battle against the truth itself. Officer Bradley Simmons adjusted his belt before stepping onto the witness stand, his stride firm as if each step affirmed an invisible authority. His uniform was crisply ironed, buttons perfectly aligned, gun holstered precisely. Everything projected the familiar image the public had been trained to trust. As Simmons stood before the microphone, he cleared his throat lightly, sweeping his gaze across the courtroom like a seasoned actor awaiting his cue. Mona Lisa sat still, her eyes following his every move. She showed no emotion, no signs of worry, as calm as a still autumn lake. Yet behind that steady gaze, she noted every small detail. The slight lift of Simmons' shoulders when he lied, the dry swallow before each exaggeration, and the quick glances at the jury, seeking validation. Simmons began weaving his narrative smoothly. He claimed that while patrolling that night, he spotted Mona Lisa near a closed storefront, behavior he described as suspicious. He painted her as uncooperative from the start, refusing to provide identification, and claimed that upon a second request, she became aggressive. His voice shifted subtly, becoming more guarded, as if he were reenacting a dangerous moment he had heroically survived. He went on to say that Mona Lisa resisted, pushed, and attempted to seize his weapon, emphasizing that he had no choice but to restrain her to protect himself and the surrounding citizens. Each word was carefully selected, the familiar language of a system that had institutionalized violence under the guise of necessity. At every key point, Simmons paused slightly, allowing the jury to absorb the fear he was sowing. Mona Lisa sat unmoving, a rock planted firm against a swirling current. She neither reacted nor betrayed anger. She absorbed every lie Simmons spun, stacking them in her mind like puzzle pieces, waiting for the moment to flip the entire picture he was so carefully constructing. To her, this wasn't merely listening to an accusation. It was watching an enemy entangle himself in the very web he thought would remain invisible. Simmons ended his initial testimony with a weary sigh, casting himself as the true victim. He looked up at the judge with pleading eyes, then swept a glance toward the jury, seeking sympathy. Some jurors nodded slowly, others scribbled notes. But Mona Lisa knew appearances might fool eyes, but they could never permanently hide the truth. Standing tall at the witness stand, Simmons' uniform glinted under the courtroom lights, his badge flashing like an unspoken testament to righteousness. He launched into his testimony with a steady, almost narrative tone, as if what he was about to say was nothing but inevitable truth. Simmons recounted the fateful night with suspiciously meticulous detail, every word deliberately chosen to steer the courtroom toward a perfectly constructed story. He, the dutiful officer, encountered Mona Lisa loitering outside a closed business. Upon requesting her ID, she not only refused but instantly became hostile, using foul language and threatening gestures. He claimed he patiently explained the lawful basis for his actions, tried to de-escalate, but Mona Lisa continued her disruptive behavior and even attempted to reach for his weapon. His voice remained even. His eyes occasionally flickered across the jury, emphasizing key points. He described how he was forced to restrain her to prevent escalation, stating he acted in strict accordance with standard procedures, using only the minimum necessary force. His word choices were deliberate. Not attack, but restrain. Not violence, but safety. Simmons even layered in emotional appeals, expressing regret that he had to use force on a woman, but insisting that the sacred duty of an officer is to protect the community from any danger, regardless of who it comes from. Mona Lisa remained silent throughout, a detached spectator to an all too familiar, poorly staged play. Beneath her still expression, she catalogued every inconsistency, the unnatural flow of Simmons's story, the emotional embellishments, the deliberate pauses inviting sympathy. She recognized this style of storytelling, seen before in fabricated battlefield reports, where personal failures were painted as collective heroism with just the right gloss of language. She didn't just hear Simmons, she listened for what he wasn't saying, the gaps where the truth had been twisted beyond recognition. In the gallery, some nodded, some wavered under Simmons' polished tale, but Mona Lisa knew. The smoother the story, the less likely it was true. Real truth was rough, inconvenient, and hard to swallow, and for that reason she allowed herself the faintest of smiles, a fleeting, almost invisible curve of her lips, like a cloud drifting across the sun. She knew every word Simmons uttered, no matter how carefully sugar-coated, was another brick in the tomb of his own deception. Mona Lisa sat still, hands loosely intertwined in her lap, her spine straight as a pillar amidst a courtroom thick with prejudice. She let Simmons's words flow past her without interruption, without emotional reaction, her face as smooth as unbroken water. But inside, a silent machine was working. Every syllable Simmons spoke was carefully recorded in her mind, methodically, deliberately. She wasn't just hearing him, she was reading him. His voice tremors, his breath changes, the minute movements of his fingers. Every unconscious tell that years of battlefield experience had taught her to recognize. Each accusation Simmons made, from portraying her as shouting and disruptive to alleging a deliberate grab for his weapon, was like a small knife stabbed into the truth. But Mona Lisa did not resist prematurely. She chose to gather, to wait. She knew the real battle was not won by yelling innocence, but by dismantling lies with unshakable logic. She noted every time Simmons averted his eyes when recounting violence, every quick swallow when painting her as a threat, every unconscious tightening of his fingers when invoking protecting the community. These were tiny signs, but to someone trained to read survival from body language, they were as loud as gunfire. She also observed the jury, the furrow of a middle-aged juror's brow when Simmons called her an aggressor. Another juror glancing at his watch, weary of the too-mooth, textbook-perfect tale. Mona Lisa wasn't just facing Simmons. She was reading the cracks in the wall he had built. And she knew one well-placed strike could bring the whole wall down. Inside Mona Lisa there was no hatred, only the cold patience of a warrior. She didn't need to shout to demand attention, nor rage to prove injustice. She needed only the truth. And truth, as she had learned under thousands of foreign skies, always finds a way to shine, if you wait long enough. The trial continued. Simmons kept weaving his distorted world where he was the hero and she the troublemaker, but Mona Lisa let his words wash over her. She knew truth didn't require dramatic defense. It needed only one person, calm, persistent, and courageous enough to carry it to the end. And today, that person was her. The air inside the courtroom thickened as Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly against the bench, the sound ringing out like a summons. Benjamin Carter, the young lawyer sitting beside Mona Lisa, felt every chaotic beat of his heart. His suit seemed tighter than usual. His hand twitched slightly as he flipped through his crumpled notes. Every strategy, every argument he had prepared the night before now felt small and fragile under the crushing weight bearing down on him. Across the room, Officer Simmons had just finished his testimony. A smug smile lingered at the corner of his mouth, as if he merely had to sit back and wait for the final gavel strike. Benjamin swallowed hard. He knew how the system worked, knew too well how a neatly pressed uniform and a polished smile could easily manipulate the trust of a jury. But when he turned toward Mona Lisa, he froze. She sat there, unmoving like a rock standing firm in a raging river. No wrinkle of worry creased her forehead, no nervous twitch of the hands. Her gaze was steady, not drifting or uncertain, but filled with the deep calm of someone who had long grown used to standing at the edge of life and death, yet remaining absolutely composed. Mona Lisa tilted her head slightly, as if she were sensing the air in the room rather than listening to its noise. Benjamin picked up his pen, its tip pressing against the paper, but he couldn't write a single word. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that he had a strategy, that he trusted their evidence, but he wasn't sure himself. On one side was a system built on lies, too entrenched to topple with reason alone. On the other was the fragile truth of a solitary black woman facing the cold, towering wall of prejudice. Mona Lisa calmly adjusted the collar of her shirt, a small movement, yet deliberate, like a soldier checking their gear before battle. The midday light brushed through the high windows, highlighting the composed lines of her face. In her, Benjamin saw not just resilience, but a different kind of strength. The strength of someone who understood that survival wasn't about shouting louder than your oppressor, but about lasting through every moment without losing yourself. Simmons cast a glance their way, brief, but enough for Benjamin to catch the disdain in it. A mocking smirk flickered at Simmons' mouth. Benjamin clenched his pen tighter. He had seen too many trials where the truth was twisted simply because appearances outweighed substance. And now he was afraid, not for himself, but for the woman sitting beside him, who had chosen not to respond to contempt with anger, but with ironclad silence. Judge Grayson spoke, calling Mona Lisa's name. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Benjamin turned to her, searching for even a flicker of hesitation, a hint of fear, but all he found was a barely noticeable nod and a sharp glint flashing in Mona Lisa's eye. She rose, slow but steady, neither rushed nor reluctant. Every step she took toward the witness stand sounded like silent drumbeats in Benjamin's chest. He knew that any words of encouragement he might have offered were useless. Mona Lisa didn't need hollow reassurances. He was ready for the battle ahead, one no one else could fight for her. Mona Lisa's steady steps toward the stand were like golden threads connecting her proud past to the hard present. Benjamin watched her, frozen, the pen still clenched, unused in his hand, feeling as though he stood at the brink, witnessing a battle where all his crafted arguments were dust compared to her weight. When Mona Lisa reached the stand, she paused for a heartbeat, turned slightly, and caught Benjamin's gaze. There were no words, no grand gestures, only a calm look that carried an unspoken message. Don't worry. In that moment, Benjamin realized he was standing beside someone whose strength wasn't built on skill or education alone, but on an inner peace forged through surviving every storm. He took a deep breath, loosening his clenched hand, feeling as if he too had drawn some of that strength. Mona Lisa sat down slowly at the witness stand, adjusted the microphone with quiet care, refusing to let the invisible tension in the room rattle her control. When Judge Grayson asked her to swear in, Mona Lisa raised her head, her voice steady and low, echoing against the high courtroom walls. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." No tremble, no misstep. Benjamin watched her every move, now certain that Mona Lisa's long silence had never been about weakness or fear. It was the silence of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and chosen to fight her battles her own way. Not loudly, not for show, but sharply, enduringly, like steel tempered by fire. While the prosecution prepared to question her, Mona Lisa sat firm, her back straight, eyes forward, unmoved. Her silence became a wall, blocking every judgmental look, every whisper of doubt in the room. The murmurs faded. The initial smirks turned into cautious glances. She was no longer easy to read, and it was precisely that mystery that unsettled them. Benjamin tightened his grip on the folder before him. He knew the battle ahead would be brutal, that the prosecution would twist her words, lay traps, try to shake her calm. But looking at her now, he knew they would fail. Because Mona Lisa wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every truth still choked outside these walls, for every voice long pushed out of the light. As the prosecutor straightened his tie and approached the stand, the room again held its breath. But Mona Lisa sat still, as if she had already seen everything coming, and welcomed it, not with defiance, but with quiet, unshakable resolve. Benjamin closed his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply, letting the fear dissipate into the air. He understood now. The moment Mona Lisa rose to her feet, she was no longer just a lone defendant. She had become a defender of her own dignity, of the truth, and of all the silent souls watching from afar. And he, Benjamin Carter, would be there, not to save her, but to stand beside her. Mona Lisa sat upright, the faint light from the tall window behind her casting a long, slender but resolute shadow across the wooden floor, just like the woman herself. The prosecutor stood before her, his voice dry and echoing through the courtroom. "Jackson, do you have a response to Officer Simmons' testimony?" The man made a pass to hold the air in the courtroom seemed choked tight. Reporters paused their note-taking. Curious onlookers held their breath. Even the slightest scrape of a chair sounded loud and sharp. Benjamin Carter gripped the folder in his hands, eyes locked on Mona Lisa, though he knew she needed no reminder. Mona Lisa inhaled deeply, unhurried. She let her gaze sweep across the courtroom before answering, her dark, deep eyes reflecting an almost cold calmness. Her voice rose, not loud, not rushed, but each word slicing through the thick air. "I do." Just 2 words. Yet they ignited the smoldering tension that had lingered all morning. The prosecutor frowned slightly, as if surprised by her complete self-possession. Mona Lisa gave him no chance to interrupt. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady like a soldier's heartbeat on the battlefield. "Officer Simmons' testimony does not accurately reflect what happened that night." A ripple of murmuring stirred from the spectators. Mona Lisa didn't turn toward them, didn't seek support. She continued, her tone unwavering. "I know every word I speak today will be scrutinized. I know that with this skin, with this name, I am required to do more than just tell the truth. I must prove it." A short pause, not out of hesitation, but to let her words sink into every mind present. Mona Lisa looked directly at the prosecutor, then let her gaze briefly flicker toward Simmons, sitting nearby. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a faint, almost invisible smile touched her lips. It wasn't mockery, it wasn't sarcasm. It was the smile of someone who knows that truth, with enough patience, always steps into the light. Benjamin held his breath. He felt the atmosphere shift, slowly but surely, from condescension to focus, from focus to doubt. Mona Lisa hadn't yet presented evidence or torn apart Simmons' claims, but through sheer calmness and unshakable conviction, she had begun to crack the wall of prejudice around. Judge Grayson nodded for the prosecutor to proceed, but everyone in the room knew the tide was beginning to turn. Mona Lisa adjusted her position, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the witness stand. No rush, no fluster. She began to unravel the inconsistencies in Officer Simmons' testimony, like a master sculptor patiently carving into a block of stone. "According to Officer Simmons," Mona Lisa said steadily, her eyes never leaving the prosecutor, "I displayed hostile behavior the moment he approached me." She paused, letting everyone recall what they had heard. "However, he also testified that I was standing alone on the sidewalk, not disturbing the peace, not posing a threat to anyone. If that's true, on what basis did a woman simply checking her phone become an immediate threat requiring force?" A cough echoed from the press section. No one answered, and Mona Lisa didn't need an answer. She let the question hang in the air, a simple but devastating trap, forcing everyone to confront the obvious contradiction. She continued, voice calm, measured. "Officer Simmons claimed I attempted to grab his weapon." She paused again, this time briefly locking eyes with Judge Grayson before turning back to the prosecutor. A professionally trained officer, by his own record, should have procedures in place to control a situation without allowing a suspect near his weapon. If that's the case, why did his body cam conveniently malfunction at the exact moment of the alleged struggle? The courtroom seemed to shrink. Those who had been lounging back in their seats now unconsciously leaned forward, straining to hear every word, to see what they had missed. At the plaintiff's table, Officer Simmons began to shift in his seat, adjusting his tie, licking his lips, small telling signs Mona Lisa didn't miss. She knew liars often crack from the smallest of tremors. An incident serious enough to justify immediate force, Mona Lisa stressed, but no video evidence, no third-party witness statements, and the only account of the event comes from the very individual accused of using unnecessary force. From the defense table, Benjamin Carter gave a subtle nod. He saw it clearly. Mona Lisa was dismantling the opposing case, not with anger, not with heavy accusations, but with sharp logic and absolute calm. Mona Lisa let the silence linger. She didn't need to shout the truth. She only needed to plant it, like a seed, sinking roots deep into the soil of every mind present. She waited, letting the room drown in the weight of its own thoughts. Her hand relaxed on the stand, her gaze steady and unblinking toward the prosecutor and Officer Simmons, whose growing discomfort was now visible. When she spoke again, her voice was just as steady, neither raised nor heavy, but each word landed harder than any accusation. "I'm not here to beg for belief," Mona Lisa said, her eyes sweeping from the jury to Judge Grayson, and finally to the spectators. "I'm here to remind you, truth doesn't need to shout to exist. It only needs time to emerge." A slight rustle came from the public benches as a woman adjusted her seat without realizing. From behind, Benjamin observed the change in the room. Skepticism turning to attention, attention turning to unease. He didn't need Mona Lisa to prove everything today. He only needed her to plant the seeds of doubt. And she was doing exactly that, with the most unshakable force, calmness. Mona Lisa placed both hands on the stand, her stance firm as a warrior stepping into a trench. "Officer Simmons told his story," she continued, her voice like the slow beat of a drum. "And I listened. You listened too. But hearing a story doesn't make it the truth." She paused, just briefly, letting the words seep into the cold stone walls of the courtroom. "I ask," she said, emphasizing each word, "that the truth be examined fully, not just through one version, not through a conveniently missing video, not through incomplete internal reports." Her voice wasn't loud, but it reached every corner of the room, shaking not the air, but the certainty of those listening. The prosecutor looked like he wanted to interrupt, but the way Mona Lisa looked directly at him, with calm, unwavering eyes, made him stop short. She didn't need miracles. She didn't need pity. She needed one thing: a fair chance for the truth to step into the light, and she knew that chance was drawing closer. "I believe," Mona Lisa concluded, her voice dropping to a warm but solid tone, "that when the truth comes out, it won't just vindicate me, it will mirror back to us what we choose to believe, and what we choose to protect." The courtroom fell utterly silent, as if even the stone walls themselves were listening. Jurors exchanged glances, unable to hide their wavering. Officer Simmons shifted uneasily in his seat. Benjamin exhaled softly, not because he was certain of victory, but because he knew that from this moment forward, Mona Lisa was no longer just a defendant. She had become the voice for all the forgotten truths. The atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift, slowly, like an underground current that at first was subtle but then started to weave its way through, showing clear ripples. The once calm gazes, the arms once tightly folded across chests, the closed-off faces, all began to show small but undeniable shifts. Some members of the jury exchanged quick glances, while, in the spectators' benches, a few people lowered their heads to take more careful notes, as if they had just heard something different from the story they were originally led to believe. Benjamin Carter sat behind the defense table, observing every small detail with the sharpness of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He could feel the change unfolding quietly, not through loud reactions, but through an unusual silence that wrapped around the room. Even Judge Grayson, whose face was usually as unmoving as stone, couldn't hide a slight lean forward, his eyes more focused on. She sat there, still, calm, like the eye of the storm amid the raging wind. No grand speeches, no theatrics. Mona Lisa let the truth flow through her mere presence. Her certainty, her unwavering composure, began to shake the invisible walls of prejudice. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and it was precisely that lack of effort that made the deepest impact. Officer Simmons, from the plaintiff's table, began to show signs of impatience. He shifted in his seat, casting annoyed glances toward his colleagues. The confident smile was gone, replaced by a tense, tight-lipped frown. Simmons wasn't stupid. He could feel it too. The rope he had been holding since the beginning of the trial was slipping from his grasp. A soft breeze slipped through the tall windows, stirring the heavy curtains. Outside, the sun still shone on the streets as always, but inside this room, the weather had changed. People were beginning to listen, truly listen, instead of just waiting to confirm what they thought they already knew. Mona Lisa said nothing more. She let silence work its power, forcing every wandering thought in the room to find its own path to understanding. She knew that sometimes the strongest words are the ones unspoken, sinking deep into the gaps that silence leaves behind. Benjamin took a deep breath, his hands loosening. He knew the battle wasn't over, but the real fight had begun the moment the eyes in that room no longer moved in unison. When old beliefs started to crack under the weight of a presence so steady and so real. Mona Lisa sat upright in the witness chair, her gaze sweeping across the now silent room. No need for a polished script, no need to orchestrate a story. When the judge nodded for her to begin, she spoke with plain honesty, as if there was no other way to tell it. That night, Mona Lisa's voice rang out, steady and sure. I was on my way home after visiting a friend. My phone died along the way, so I stopped under a streetlight to check my map. She paused, letting everyone picture a woman alone late at night, simply trying to find her way home. While I was standing there, Officer Simmons approached me. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask any polite questions. He shined his flashlight directly in my face and demanded to know what I was doing there. Her voice did not waver, did not rise. Her calmness was like a blade, quiet but razor-sharp, slicing through the glossy picture Simmons had tried to paint. I answered that I was just checking my way home. When he asked for my ID, I asked why. Mona Lisa recounted, her gaze never once faltering. I didn't shout. I didn't make any threatening moves. I simply asked, what did I do wrong? That question echoed through the courtroom like a voice calling out from the forgotten corners of justice. His reaction, Mona Lisa continued, was not to explain or reassure. Instead, he raised his voice, called me uncooperative, and without warning grabbed my wrist. A soft murmur rose from the spectators' benches, but Mona Lisa kept her rhythm steady, unfazed. I reflexively pulled my hand back, and that's when he pushed me against the patrol car. I didn't resist, but I protested verbally, saying, "You have no right to do this." The truth, simple and brutal in its calm delivery, cut through the silence like a sharp, clean blade. Benjamin Carter gripped the arm of his chair, feeling each ripple of silent shock spread through the room. Mona Lisa looked straight ahead as she spoke her final lines. Throughout the entire encounter, he continued to yell at me, accusing me of being disruptive. No one recorded the incident, no witnesses besides us. And his body cam that night just happened to capture nothing at all. The final words dropped like a stone, shattering the courtroom's fragile quiet. The entire room fell into heavy silence, as if everyone was struggling to picture it. A woman simply standing under a streetlight, and an entire system ready to crush her because she dared to ask, "What did I do wrong?" Mona Lisa finished her testimony without a single tear, without a single sob. It was that very calmness that was the most powerful accusation of all. And for the first time in the trial, Officer Simmons lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Night fell over Charleston with a heavy silence, like a thick blanket pressed down over the old rooftops. Streetlights cast a pale yellow glow onto the damp asphalt, cars passing only occasionally, leaving blurred trails of light behind. Mona Lisa sat in her small apartment, hands resting loosely by her sides, her gaze brooding as she stared out into the darkness beyond the window. The daytime trial still echoed in her mind like a storm, yet to subside. Outwardly calm, she knew the real battle had only just begun. The shrill ring of the telephone shattered the silence, jarring against the too-quiet air. Mona Lisa glanced at the screen. An unknown number, but instinct told her this call was no coincidence. She picked up, her voice low and curt. "Hello?" On the other end, a familiar voice rasped out, as if carried across 1,000 miles of battered radio waves. "Mona, it's me, Ryan Carter." For a fleeting moment, memories surged like icy waves. Dim corridors of makeshift bases, the scent of gunpowder mingled with salt air, silent glances exchanged across unspoken battle lines. Commander Ryan Carter, the old comrade who had once pulled her out of situations where a single mistake would have doomed the whole team. She gripped the phone tighter, her voice dropping instinctively. "Why are you calling me at this hour?" A long pause, then Ryan answered, crisp as a battlefield command. "I have something you need." Mona Lisa didn't ask further, simply waited. She understood Ryan. He never wasted words. Ryan continued, each word heavy as lead. "I found a security camera video from that night. Not only does it capture the entire incident, it also shows Simmons sabotaging his own body cam." Mona Lisa's breath slowed, her chest tightening slightly. The evidence they needed, the piece that could unravel Simmons's entire testimony, was now in the hands of someone she trusted. But she also heard what Ryan didn't say. No such footage would exist if Ryan had it, it meant he had exposed himself. In Kochensky, blues her eyes, flashes of past enemies creeping along the edges of their missions filling her mind, threats that time could never erase. Ryan seemed to sense it. His voice dropped, warning laced into each syllable. "There's a catch. The video, it accidentally caught part of your face during another situation you handled that night. The kind of thing that the people who used to hunt you would recognize immediately." Mona Lisa opened her eyes, staring out into the pitch-black sky. The war she thought she had left behind seemed to have been waiting for this very moment to drag her back. She said nothing, only listened to the heavy exhale from the other end, one of the few sounds left between soldiers too familiar with the dark. Ryan's voice deepened, each word a boulder falling into the silent night. "If you use this video in court, it will crush Simmons' lies, no question. You'll win." He paused, giving Mona Lisa time to process the gravity of it. But she didn't reply, waiting instead for the inevitable next line, knowing that with Ryan, a pause always carried heavy consequences. And then he said it, blunt and clear. "But if the footage gets out, your face, the situation you handled that night, could bring old files back to life. People you once fought will know exactly where you are." A cold shiver crawled down Mona Lisa's spine. Memories of those classified missions rushed back. The names never spoken aloud, the reports sealed away, the deaths that never made headlines. In those places, one small mistake was enough to erase an entire team from the map. Now, if that past was revived, the ones who had once lurked in the shadows would know she was still alive. Across the line, Ryan pressed on, calm as if reading a tactical report. "I'm not saying this to scare you. I just want you to see the full picture. You win the trial, you might have to live the rest of your life on the run. You stay silent, you might lose, but you keep your peace. Choose." Mona Lisa stood, walking toward the window, The dim light of a street lamp sculpted sharp lines across her face, making her look like a marble statue. She gazed out into the darkness, where the past might already be watching. Her mind didn't race. It didn't falter. It narrowed into a single, simple question. Why had she fought in the first place? For herself, or for those crushed under the corrupt power that Simmons embodied? A long moment passed before she lifted the phone to her lips, her voice steadier than the night sea. "Send me the footage. I'll handle the rest. No hesitation, no fear." Ryan exhaled heavily, a sound not quite agreement, not quite protest. "I'll send it. But Mona, be careful. Not everyone's forgotten you." The call ended, leaving the room drenched in silence. Mona Lisa set the phone down on the table, arms folding across her chest, eyes still locked on the endless night outside. She knew now her battle wasn't confined to the courtroom. It stretched beyond cold walls, reaching out to shadows she thought she had left behind. But she did not waver. Not now. Not ever. The night was still thick outside the glass window, but inside Mona Lisa, thoughts had begun to churn like an unstoppable underground current. The phone on the table buzzed lightly. A short text from Ryan Carter appeared. "Check encrypted email. Attachment." No further warning, but the urgency hidden in that brevity made her rise and move toward her computer. She typed in a password sequence long and familiar, like a sacred mantra, unlocking an interface recognizable only to those who had worked the highest-level missions. A single video file was waiting. Mona Lisa took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from knowing that with just one click, she would be stepping back into a world she had once sworn to leave behind forever. The screen flickered. The video loaded. The grainy security camera footage didn't blur the clarity of what unfolded. Simmons appeared, restraining a woman. It was her, Mona Lisa, standing firm, calm, showing no signs of resistance, contrary to the accusations against her. "Bam," he growled, gripping her arm forcefully, then slyly yanked the body cam off his chest, removing the battery and tossing it to the ground, turning his back to the camera. Mona Lisa felt her throat dry up. This was irrefutable evidence. Simmons had lied. He had sabotaged the recording device to cover up his misconduct, and it was all caught on tape, undeniable. But the video didn't stop there. As Mona Lisa was shoved against the patrol car, she reacted on instinct, shifting her body weight, lowering her center of gravity, breaking free from his grip with a swift, clean move. To an untrained eye, it might seem like pure reflex, but to those who knew, it was unmistakable. A specialized combat technique, the kind only possessed by those who had endured the most grueling training programs. And then, one critical, fatal detail. In that split-sec escape, her face turned fully toward the camera. Her eyes cold, focused, the eyes of a warrior. Ryan called, the moment she closed the video. His voice was dry, clipped like the briefings they had shared on battlefields. "You saw it. That move, that look. Not everyone will catch it, but those who hunted us, they will." Mona Lisa leaned back against the wall, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She understood what Ryan didn't need to say aloud. Her identity wasn't just a name. It was a death warrant to those with old scores to settle. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, invisible hands were still patiently waiting for a single signal. And now they had it. Ryan's voice stayed level. "If this video gets out, you won't just destroy Simmons. You will put yourself back on the radar of those who swore never to let us live." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft tapping of wind against the glass, a reminder that from here, every decision would carry no return. Mona Lisa clenched her fists, her gaze darkening but unwavering. She had fought once to survive. If she had to, she would fight again. This time, not just for herself, but for all those still buried beneath lies. Standing at the window, the faint glow of a streetlight outside barely illuminated part of her face, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Night encased the room, but inside her a storm was gathering, battering against the deepest hidden corners of her memory. She knew what it meant to move forward with that video. It wasn't just about exposing a lie. It wasn't just about bringing down a corrupt officer. It was about opening a door she had fought to seal shut, unleashing threats she thought she had buried with her classified missions. A small voice inside her, quiet but not weak, suggested she retreat, that maybe she should protect the fragile peace she had built after so many years of battles. Maybe justice didn't demand another sacrifice. But the thought was crushed immediately, not by anger, but by the cold logic of someone who had stood too many times on the razor's edge between life and death. If not me, then who? He thought of all the faceless people she had met, the ones stopped for no reason, interrogated because of their skin color, ground down by a system that never remembered their names. Simmons was just one of many. One link in a long, rotting chain. And if she stayed silent now, she would become part of that silence. Someone who knew and turned away. Someone who denied the truth for the sake of her own fear. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Ryan. Confirm if you want me to send it tonight. 3 blinking dots waiting for her reply, like a knock from the past demanding entry. Mona Lisa stared at the screen for a long moment before her fingers, steady and unhesitating, typed 2 words. Ascended. She set the phone down and exhaled deeply. Outside, a strong gust rattled the bare branches, the sound like the whispers of old ghosts. Mona Lisa tilted her head slightly, listening to the thick silence wrapping around her. She knew that from this moment forward, she wasn't just fighting for her own innocence. She was fighting for truth, for those without voices, for battles where sometimes the cost was the last shred of peace. And she was ready, not because she didn't know fear, but because she understood. True courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Mona Lisa's small apartment sat in silence, as if the pressure weighing on the air had squeezed out every last sound. On the table, her phone screen had gone dark, but its presence still hung heavy like a festering wound. In her email, the video sat there, cold and unforgiving, a gleaming double-edged sword, waiting for the hand that would decide where it would strike. Mona Lisa leaned back against the wall, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and deep, as if anchoring herself against the maelstrom of thoughts raging within. Since she was 19, she had understood that some decisions could never be taken back. Decisions that closed the door on one life and opened another, where freedom, trust, even existence itself became fragile coins tossed onto a table far larger than her own world. Revealing the video meant tearing off Simmons' mask, and the mask of the system that had protected him. But the cost wouldn't end there. That video wasn't just evidence, it was a declaration that she was still alive, that the soldier erased from the military records still existed, still fought, and the enemies she had once wounded, the powers she had once shattered, they had not forgotten. They had only been sleeping, waiting for a signal to awaken. Mona Lisa opened her eyes, her gaze hardening to steel. She had survived nighttime hunts, assassins who left no traces. She had learned how to breathe in darkness, how to exist unnoticed. She had earned every scrap of normalcy through prices only she understood. And now, everything she had built could vanish. In one trial, with one choice, to tell the truth. Survival instinct whispered to her, stay silent. Justice had long been corroded. Someone like her, no matter how brave, could not take on the entire system. She deserved the fragile peace she had fought so hard to create. But deep down, in the place where the fiercest battles had raged, Mona Lisa knew Peace, built on silence in the face of injustice, was no real peace. It was just another form of prison. And she had sworn long ago never to bow to any prison, whether visible or invisible. Mona Lisa remained still in the dim room, as if the weight of the choice before her pinned her body in place. Outside the window, the city exhaled its slow, late-night breath. A few faint stars trembled in a smoky gray sky. Part of her wanted to shut it all down, close the laptop, turn off the phone, disappear, just as she had after her final mission. But a deeper part, one long rooted in her heart, whispered that this time, running was not an option. Mona Lisa knew she wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for those crushed by the system, for the names no one spoke, for the cries buried under silence. The video in her hands wasn't just evidence. It was a rare chance to expose the truth, even if the price of carrying that torch could very well be her own life. She walked toward the table. The cold blue light from the laptop screen illuminated her calm face. Without hesitation, Mona Lisa opened the folder containing the video, her fingers gliding through the motions like a familiar ritual. She didn't need to think anymore. The decision had already been made the moment she chose to walk into that courtroom with her eyes wide open, the moment she chose to stand tall while suspicion rained down on her. She sent the file to Benjamin Carter, along with a short message. Prepared to present evidence. See you in court tomorrow morning. No explanations. No fear. Mona Lisa trusted that if Benjamin had truly sensed the weight of truth in her words that day, he would know exactly what to do. She leaned back into the chair and took a long breath. A strange feeling rose in her chest, not quite fear, not quite relief. It was like seeing the road ahead clearly, jagged, full of deep pits and traps, yet choosing to walk it without flinching. The night outside was still deep and cold, but inside Mona Lisa, a small, steady flame had been lit. She knew, from this moment on, every step would be watched. Every door could hide a threat. But she also knew something even more certain. Truth, once lit, finds its own way. And she, even if just a small flame in the storm, would not let it be extinguished. That night, Mona Lisa barely slept. She sat motionless on an old wooden chair, the light from a small lamp casting shadows across her face, deep in thought. Though her body was inside a peaceful apartment, her mind drifted back to a memory over a decade old, to the place where she had learned her first and most important lesson about courage. That summer, at a training base near the border, the daytime heat was enough to crack the ground and the nights were bone-chillingly cold. During nights of training under starry skies, she and her teammates were pushed to their physical and mental limits, where every shred of confidence and every layer of false toughness was stripped away. In a survival exercise, Mona Lisa was left alone in the forest at night, no map, no communication, only a few primitive tools and a single order: find her way back to base before sunrise. As the darkness and isolation gnawed at her will, she had wanted to give up. The howling wind through the barren trees, the unidentifiable sounds from the shadows, and most of all the nameless fear tightening around her heart, all of it seemed insurmountable. It was then that her mentor, Commander Blake, a living legend in the SEAL community, appeared from the darkness like a ghost. He didn't scold, didn't encourage. He simply sat beside her and said in a deep, raspy voice, worn from years on the battlefield, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Mona. Courage is acting despite it." Those words, simple yet sharp as a dagger, embedded themselves deep in her mind. That night, Mona Lisa didn't flee from fear. She stood up, embraced the trembling in her legs, and step by step, through the rough terrain, she found her way back to base as the first rays of light broke the horizon. Now, sitting in the midst of another kind of battle, no weapons, no comrades, just herself and a fear far deeper than any jungle night, Mona Lisa could still hear those words echoing within her. Courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about moving forward even when terror loomed ahead. She understood more clearly than ever that truly important decisions are always made under the weight of fear. Without fear, choices would lose their meaning. And if she let fear dictate her now, everything she had ever believed in, fought for, would become meaningless. That long-ago lesson flickered like a dim light through the darkest corners of her mind, where fear tried to take root. She sat silently in the dark, feeling the slow but steady beat of her heart. With every beat she listened, she faced her fears, the fear of being hunted, betrayed, losing the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. But instead of letting fear consume her, she allowed it to exist, accepted it as part of this journey. She stood up slowly, like someone ready to shoulder the weight of the decision ahead. Each step crushed a little more of the hesitation that remained. Mona Lisa knew well there would be days, moments, when she would have to glance over her shoulder, wary of nameless shadows. There would be sleepless nights when the smallest sound could snap her awake in defense. But she also knew that if she stayed silent now, if she turned her back on the truth just to protect herself, the part of her that vowed never to bow would die, even if her body lived on. Mona Lisa reopened her laptop, the screen's glow reflecting in her determined eyes. She reviewed the video one final time, frame by frame, ensuring not a single detail could be used against her. Not to find the reason to hesitate, but to remind herself that she fully understood the price and still chose to move forward. A message from Benjamin Carter arrived at 2 a.m, short and decisive. Received the file. I'll file the motion to admit supplemental evidence first thing tomorrow. Everything is ready. Mona Lisa typed a brief reply. So am I. Then she closed the laptop as if closing a chapter long ready to end. She put on her jacket and stepped out onto the balcony. The night sky was heavy with drifting clouds, the crescent moon hanging like a silver blade in the infinite darkness. The wind blew sharp and cold, carrying the salt of the distant sea and the earthy scent of land. Mona Lisa inhaled deeply, feeling the cold air flood her chest, washing away the last remnants of doubt. She stood there for a long time, until the city's nighttime sounds faded into the distance. No oath was spoken, no dramatic gesture was made. Mona Lisa simply stood there, silent and unyielding, like someone who understood that the battle ahead didn't need grand promises. It needed endurance, silent courage, and unwavering resolve. Beneath the faint moonlight, her shadow stretched long across the floor, steady, unmoving. Tomorrow, she would step into the courtroom not just with the video evidence in her hand, but with a heart carrying everything that truth demands: sacrifice, courage, and the belief that no matter what happened, she had made the right choice. The next morning, Mona Lisa entered Benjamin Carter's law office with a calm demeanor, as if she were preparing for an ordinary meeting. Not for the legal battle that could change her life forever. Benjamin was already waiting, his dark gray suit fitting his tall, lean frame, holding a thick stack of documents, his face tense but his eyes lighting up when he saw her. Without any small talk, he gestured for her to come in, closing the door firmly behind her. Inside the room, the air was so heavy it felt like even the dust particles were stretched thin under the pressure. A laptop sat open on the table, surrounded by a stack of paperwork, drafts of evidence presentation strategies, and an urgent motion to submit additional materials for the next morning's trial. Benjamin wasted no time on meaningless chat. He pointed directly at the screen, where a video was paused at a sensitive frame the moment Mona Lisa looked up, her sharp gaze reflected clearly in the security camera. "This is the problem," Benjamin said, his voice low and steady. "We have footage showing Simmons tampering with his body cam and using unnecessary force. But," he pointed at the frame, his gaze grave, Any motion analysis expert or someone with a military background could spot your training from that reflex. And your face. It's too clear in this shot. Mona Lisa crossed her arms, eyes locked on the screen. She understood exactly the risk Benjamin was pointing out. And she knew, just like in every battle she'd fought, true victory lay in controlling the information, letting the opposition see only what you wanted them to see. Benjamin flipped open another file, revealing a detailed plan, each video clip cut and arranged carefully to present the case. "We'll request to show only selected segments of the video," he said, his voice calmer when talking about strategy. "Only the parts that demonstrate Simmons's behavior, tampering with the body cam, unnecessary use of force, and his unreasonable actions. Any frames showing your face, we'll digitally blur them. Our argument? Protecting the victim's privacy." Mona Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You think the court will allow that?" Benjamin nodded. "I'll cite the Witness Protection Act and federal precedents. As long as we can prove that full disclosure could endanger your safety, the judge has the authority to permit a redacted version." He paused, his eyes razor-sharp. "But we have to be smart. We can't let the opposition argue that we're manipulating evidence in our favor." Mona Lisa nodded slightly, saying nothing more. In her mind, the pieces were falling into place. The plan wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about doing so intelligently, minimizing exposure while maximizing impact. Benjamin opened the laptop and scrolled back to the beginning of the video timeline. Sitting side by side, they carefully reviewed every second. Each time they spotted a risky frame where Mona Lisa's eyes or reflexes betrayed her background, he marked it immediately. Sensitive frames were listed for digital blurring, while the rest were cut and edited to maintain chronological integrity. They worked for hours without pause, fueled only by a few sips of cold coffee and absolute focus. By late morning, Benjamin leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "Preliminary cut is ready." He looked up at Mona Lisa, his voice low but full of confidence. "Now we just need Judge Grayson's approval. If he agrees, we can present this version in tomorrow afternoon's session." Mona Lisa closed the file in front of her, her eyes clear of any hesitation. She had chosen this path, no turning back, no compromising with lies. Even if the video risked exposing dangers she had tried to bury, she understood some flames must be lit, no matter the consequences. Benjamin stood and extended his hand. A firm handshake. No vows, no promises, just the silent agreement of two people who knew the coming battle would be brutal. The strategy was set. The truth was sharpened like a sword in the forge. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Step into the light, raise the flag of what was right, and face whatever storms would follow. The courtroom sank into heavy silence as Mona Lisa stepped onto the witness stand. Her steps were slow but steady, without a single wasted movement. The jury followed her every gesture, while at the plaintiff's table, Officer Simmons struggled to maintain a neutral expression, his fingers gripping the armrest tightly enough to betray the mounting pressure inside him. Mona Lisa stood upright, one hand resting lightly on the stand, her gaze sweeping slowly across the room before settling on Simmons' face. No smile, no taunting look, only the cold composure of someone who knew she was holding a scalpel to the open wound of her adversary. Attorney Carter requested permission to question, and Judge Grayson nodded. Benjamin began with a simple, almost innocuous question. "Officer Simmons, could you please repeat the reason you demanded to check Miss Mona Lisa's identification that night?" Simmons adjusted his posture, his voice rising slightly as if to steady himself. "She was behaving suspiciously, loitering in a residential area late at night." Mona Lisa tilted her head slowly, as if carefully weighing each word he uttered. When Benjamin handed the floor to her, her voice rang out, warm yet heavy with weight. "You said I was loitering. Could you specifically describe the loitering behavior you observed?" Simmons faltered briefly, not expecting her to counterattack so early. Well, she was standing under a streetlight looking around, using her phone. So you confirm, Mona Lisa pressed on, her voice steady and her gaze unwavering, that I did not approach any houses, did not damage any property, and did not threaten anyone? Correct. Simmons nodded, then, realizing how easily he had conceded, hurriedly added, but that behavior was still suspicious at that hour. Mona Lisa paused for a beat, letting his answer hang in the air like an ink stain that couldn't be erased. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping lower so each word fell squarely into the minds of her listeners. Did you immediately request ID from everyone else you saw standing under a streetlight and using a phone that night, Officer Simmons? Silence swallowed the room. Simmons froze, his lips pressed tight for a fleeting moment. A faint murmur rose among the jurors. Benjamin nodded subtly from behind the defense table, signaling Mona Lisa, "Continue." The blade was getting closer to the tendon. She didn't need much, just the right questions, allowing the truth to seep naturally into everyone's consciousness. And she knew she had just started pulling the first stones from Simmons' seemingly solid wall. Simmons's hesitation, though momentary, was all Mona Lisa needed to spot the first crack in his facade. She didn't rush, didn't lunge forward like a rookie eager for a quick win. Instead, she maintained her slow, deliberate rhythm, each question a drop of water, wearing away his defenses. "Do you recall," Mona Lisa asked, her voice calm but razor-sharp, "that in your initial report you wrote, 'I was resisting an officer from the very first moment you approached'?" Simmons swallowed hard, gripping the table as he tried to maintain his composure. "Yes," he answered, though the confidence had drained from his voice. Mona Lisa nodded slowly, as if merely confirming a detail, then continued. "So, Officer Simmons, can you explain why in the security footage throughout your entire approach I am seen standing still, making no aggressive or resisting movements?" The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. Several jurors leaned forward, hanging onto every word. They all knew the video was about to be shown, and Mona Lisa had already planted the seed for an inevitable comparison. Simmons stammered, his face twitching as if caught between lying further or admitting fault. "The camera has blind spots," he mumbled. "It doesn't capture everything." Mona Lisa seized the opportunity like a veteran swordsman spotting a weakness. "Can you point out exactly which blind spot in the footage would have hidden my alleged resistance?" Simmons opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room. The plaintiff's lawyer leaned forward, about to intervene, but Judge Grayson raised his hand, signaling to continue. Simmons's discomfort became increasingly visible. His eyes darted around. His hand nervously tugged at his collar, as if struggling to breathe. In that moment, Mona Lisa didn't need to say another word. She had planted doubt deep into the minds of everyone present. Benjamin Carter, from his seat, smiled in quiet satisfaction. The goal was never to destroy the opponent with a single blow, but to let him crumble under the weight of his own arrogance and deceit. And Mona Lisa, with her unshakable patience and sharp, unwavering logic, had pushed Officer Simmons another step toward the edge of ruin. The air in the courtroom thickened, as if even the molecules were holding their breath. Mona Lisa stood firm, shoulders still, her gaze locked onto Simmons like a sharpened spear. She didn't need to raise her voice or wield grand words. Her silence alone had coaxed out Simmons' growing panic. And now, it was that very stillness that left him nowhere to retreat. Mona Lisa adjusted the microphone with a quiet, almost merciless grace. She stared straight at Simmons and asked, her voice even and icy, "You said your body cam malfunctioned right as the incident with me occurred. Could you explain to the jury why, in the security footage, you were seen removing the battery from the device before approaching?" A wave of murmurs rippled through the room like tremors across a still lake. Simmons opened his mouth, trying to say something, but only a weak, guttural sound escaped. His face flushed deep red, a twitch flared in his brow. He turned desperately toward his lawyer, seeking rescue, but no one could save him now. Mona Lisa gave him no time to recover. She stepped half a pace closer to the stand, her voice low yet cutting like steel. "So, you claim the body cam failure was technical, but it conveniently coincided with your attempt to forcibly detain me, and the footage shows you deliberately removing the device." Simmons flailed, like a man caught in a riptide. The more he struggled, the more helpless he appeared. He stammered, I was just checking. The device malfunctioned, not intentional." But each word he uttered only deepened the hole he was digging. The jurors could no longer maintain complete neutrality. Their eyes, once reserved, now turned toward Mona Lisa with sympathy and understanding, while toward Simmons only a cold, questioning skepticism remained. Judge Grayson furrowed his brows, gripping his gavel tightly. He said nothing, but his gaze, sharp as a razor, sliced across the plaintiff's table where Simmons now sat, a clumsy, faltering figure drowning in an unstoppable tide of truth. Mona Lisa drew a deep breath, not because she needed strength, but because she wanted her next words to fall like final, decisive blows. "Officer Simmons," she said, voice calm and deadly, "with all the contradictions in your testimony, with the clear actions captured in the footage, can you tell us, where is the line between negligence and deceit?" The question, soft as a whisper but sharp as a blade, pierced straight into the minds of everyone present. Simmons opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if words had abandoned him altogether. No more arrogance, no more feigned confidence. Only a man unraveling under the weight of the truth he had tried so hard to bury. Mona Lisa took a small step back, her eyes never leaving Simmons. She knew this battle wasn't over yet, but she also knew that at this moment the scales of justice had already tipped toward the truth. Benjamin Carter watched Mona Lisa from behind the defense table, his gaze quietly brimming with absolute trust. In his heart, one unspoken sentence rang out. She had won. Not with words alone, but with an unyielding spirit no lies could ever overcome. The courtroom held its breath, each heartbeat loud in the stillness. A woman, unarmed, without official power, had, through sheer patience and steadfastness, pushed a man, wearing a false badge of justice, to the brink of complete defeat. Inside the courtroom, the air felt stretched to its limit after the tense showdown between Mona Lisa and Simmons. A heavy, oppressive silence filled the space as Mona Lisa returned to the defendant's table, her gaze as cold and sharp as steel pulled fresh from the forge. Benjamin Carter didn't wait for instructions. He rose, a small USB drive already in hand. In one smooth motion, he strode toward Judge Grayson, his voice firm and unwavering. "Your Honor, I request permission to present a video recorded by an independent witness directly related to the events of that night." Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, his aged yet sharp eyes scrutinizing Benjamin for a moment before nodding. "Permission granted. But I warn you, any violation of evidence protocol will be dealt with severely." Benjamin simply nodded, offering no argument. Every move had been meticulously calculated. Mona Lisa sat still, her hands resting on her lap, fingers steady. She knew, at this moment, the truth would begin to walk into the light by itself. As the lights dimmed, the large screen behind the judge lit up, showing a blurry street corner under yellow lamplight. The footage was shaky, the witness was just a passerby filming with a phone in a random moment, but every movement, every sound was recorded clearly. Mona Lisa appeared in frame, standing quietly under a street lamp, holding her phone, her face pensive. From a distance, Officer Simmons approached quickly. No greeting, no polite request, In the video, Simmons's voice could be heard clearly. "What the hell are you doing here at this hour? Loitering, huh?" His tone wasn't that of a civil servant performing his duty. It was the tone of contempt. When Mona Lisa calmly answered, "The recording was faint but audible. I'm just checking my map to get home," Simmons moved closer and grabbed her wrist forcefully, shoving her. She stumbled, but didn't resist. A sharp intake of breath came from the jury box. A female juror furrowed her brow and quickly jotted notes into her pad. In the gallery, a low murmur rose like a wave, only to be shushed by the bailiff. The video continued. Simmons snarled again, more clearly this time. "People like you never know how to behave. Standing out here like you're casing the place, looking for trouble." His voice dripped with prejudice, his attitude seething with superiority. Benjamin stole a glance at Judge Grayson. The judge remained still, his face stern, but a flash of silent outrage glinted in his eyes. No one, no matter how cold-hearted, could deny the obvious bias and discrimination in Simmons's behavior. The video wasn't long, just 2 minutes and 30 seconds. But when the screen went dark, the room fell into an eerie, heavy emptiness. Some in the audience leaned back into their chairs, as if a psychological weight they hadn't dared to acknowledge had finally been lifted. Benjamin stepped forward, his voice steady and deliberate. "The evidence you've just seen shows the defendant exhibited no resistance prior to Officer Simmons' approach and use of force." He paused, sweeping his gaze across the jury. "And you heard it with your own ears." The words Simmons used: to judge, to impose upon, and to attack an innocent citizen not based on behavior, but based on racial prejudice. One sharp strike, enough to turn the room's silence into the heaviest piece of evidence against Simmons. Mona Lisa didn't need to say anything more. The truth, recorded so vividly, had spoken for her. She sat upright, her expression free of arrogance, free of pride, only the serene calm of someone who had chosen to walk her path completely. At the prosecution table, Simmons no longer wore his defiant expression. His head hung low, his hands clenched tightly together, like a man grasping for something to hold on to. His lawyer leaned in and whispered urgently, but Simmons only shook his head. It was too late. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly, his voice deep and resolute. "The evidence is admitted." He leaned back, his cold gaze sweeping over the room. "The trial will resume after recess. Both sides are to prepare for the next phase." The lights brightened. People began to stir. But the shift was irreversible now. A truth had been exposed. The mask had fallen away. And from this moment on, no one in that courtroom could pretend they hadn't seen it. Mona Lisa closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing herself to feel the new current filling the room, not one of doubt, but the first faint beam of justice finally piercing through the thick clouds. The bang of Judge Grayson's gavel ending the recess echoed through the courtroom, dragging a heavy silence in its wake. All eyes turned immediately toward Simmons as he was called back to the witness stand for further cross-examination. Gone was his usual calm facade, his face now strained like an overdrawn wire, the bridge of his nose flushed red, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. Benjamin Carter didn't rush the attack. He stood slowly, tapping his pen lightly on the stack of papers before him, like a conductor setting the tempo for an overture. When Benjamin finally spoke, his voice was steady, no hint of urgency. "Officer Simmons, after watching the video that was just presented, do you still assert that you acted according to proper procedure?" Simmons licked his lips, his hands unconsciously gripping the edge of the witness stand. I acted according to what I deemed necessary at the time," he said, each word clinging to him like a flimsy lifeline. But the over-careful wording only made the answer seem more contrived. Benjamin gave a slight nod, as if he had expected nothing else. He stepped closer, holding up the original report Simmons filed immediately after the incident. In your report, you stated that the defendant was violently resisting, forcing you to use strong physical measures to subdue her. However, in the video just presented, we see no resistance from Ms. Mona Lisa. How do you explain this contradiction? A thin sheen of sweat began to gather on Simmons' forehead. He darted a glance at his lawyer, but no rescue came. He stammered, The camera might not have captured everything. There could have been subtle acts of defiance. She might have covertly challenged my authority." A few faint coughs and disbelieving headshakes rippled through the audience. The jury, once keeping their faces neutral, now showed clear signs of doubt. They didn't need anyone to spell it out. Simmons' own contradictions were tearing apart the steady image he had tried to project. Benjamin didn't press harder. He tilted his head slightly, his voice still level but cutting. "Are you saying that a black woman standing quietly under a streetlight holding a phone, showing no threatening gestures, could covertly challenge the authority of an armed officer like yourself?" Simmons opened his mouth, but no excuse could form. He darted his eyes around the room, seeking rescue, but there were only the judge's cold stare, the silent, intense focus of the jury, and the steady, unyielding presence of Mona Lisa at the defense table. At that moment, a major crack split the last wall of Simmons' defense. And like any structure once cracked, collapse was now only a matter of time. As Simmons slumped back into his seat, the entire courtroom seemed wrapped in a suffocating, brittle tension. No applause. But the silent glances exchanged between jury members said it all. A wall of trust had begun to crumble. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair in seat 3 leaned toward the woman beside him, whispering something with a look of grave concern and growing outrage. Elsewhere, a young woman absent-mindedly chewed on her pen. Her eyes locked onto Simmons. Her sympathy evaporated. And in the front row, a juror, a black man who had remained quiet throughout, leaned forward for the first time, his gaze fixed sharply on Mona Lisa, as if trying to hear even her breathing. Mona Lisa sat motionless, her hands lightly clasped in her lap, posture upright but unboastful. She didn't need to win with anger. She didn't need to shout to be believed. She needed only the truth. And the truth, like water seeping through fine cracks, was beginning to flow into every mind present. Benjamin Carter recognized the shift. He rose, his voice humble but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have not only seen misconduct from a police officer, we have seen how a system of trust can be weaponized, where power meant to protect becomes power used against those it was sworn to defend." He paused, letting the words settle. If trust in the law can be bent by a lie, then justice will be the next victim. Another juror gave a slight, unconscious nod. Two women exchanged a look. One pressed her lips together in silent determination. The plaintiff's lawyer tried to counter, objecting to the video as edited, suggesting Mona Lisa had a motive to fabricate accusations to damage Simmons' reputation. But the argument slipped off cold stone. None of the jurors seemed interested anymore in salvaging Simmons' image. What they saw was clear: a man in uniform, stumbling and stammering under undeniable evidence. When court recessed again, Mona Lisa rose slowly from her seat, unhurried. She could feel the jury's eyes following her every step. No longer suspicion thick in the air, no longer cold, dismissive stares. Now, attentive with the weight of shifting belief. In the hallway, Benjamin caught up to her with only a nod. No words were necessary. He understood, and she understood. The battle wasn't over, but the scales had begun to tip toward the truth. Outside the courthouse, the heavy clouds were starting to break apart, letting the first thin rays of sunlight pierce through. And inside Mona Lisa, she knew, the wall had begun to crack. Your justice, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way back to the light. When the court reconvened after the break, the silence that filled the room had a different weight. It was no longer the guarded tension of the first day, nor simple anxiety, it was anticipation. A quiet sense settled over the air, as if everyone knew that what was about to happen would be a point of no return. Mona Lisa sat upright, her gaze calm but razor-focused. In front of her, Benjamin Carter had already prepared the necessary documents, and the small USB drive containing the security footage Ryan Carter had sent was tucked securely inside his suit pocket. When Judge Grayson nodded to allow the presentation of supplemental evidence, Benjamin rose, his voice clear but grave, matching the seriousness of the moment. "Your Honor," Benjamin began, "we request to present a segment of video footage obtained from the security cameras in the vicinity of the incident. However, because the footage contains images relating to a classified military operation, in the interest of the participants' rights and national security, we request permission to edit, blur, or obscure any parts not directly relevant to the case." The courtroom went still. The way Benjamin framed the request, combined with Mona Lisa's absolute composure, immediately muted any potential objection from the plaintiff's side. When national security is invoked, any interference can easily be seen as irresponsibility. Judge Grayson frowned thoughtfully for a few seconds, then asked, "Is the video materially relevant to the case at hand?" Benjamin nodded, his eyes never leaving the judge. "Yes, Your Honor. It directly evidences Officer Simmons' misconduct, including tampering with recording equipment and the use of unnecessary force." Grayson tapped his gavel lightly, his gaze sweeping quickly across the room. "Permission granted under clear conditions. Only segments directly related to the incident may be shown, and all sensitive security content must be properly handled." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Benjamin stepped forward, plugging the USB into the courtroom's projection system. The lights dimmed slightly. The large screen lit up. And that night, a part of the truth buried, unfolded before everyone's eyes. In the video, Mona Lisa appeared under the glare of a tall streetlight, her figure blurred but recognizable as she checked her phone. Simmons approached from a distance, aggressive in posture. The video clearly captured him removing his body cam, stealthily pulling the battery and stuffing the device into his jacket before closing in on Mona Lisa. The murmurs grew louder. Some jurors exchanged glances filled with unconcealed shock. Tampering with a body cam was a blatant, self-incriminating act. No officer was permitted to disable surveillance during duty, especially when engaging a civilian. Mona Lisa remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the screen, her back as straight as a drawn bowstring. When the critical moment arrived, the instant her face and reflexes became apparent, the screen transitioned into a skillfully blurred effect. All that could be seen was a composed figure deftly evading Simmons' aggressive approach, without exposing any special combat techniques. The entire room was pulled into the footage. Simmons, standing at the plaintiff's table, turned ashen, his lips tightly pressed together. He knew the situation had spun beyond his control. There was no longer an argument he could make, no excuse he could offer to erase the actions the video had captured. When the footage ended, the courtroom plunged into an extended silence. No applause, no outcry, just silence. Heavy, thick, and as sharp as a verdict that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Benjamin rose, walking slowly to the podium. His voice didn't need to rise, didn't need to push. "You have seen. We do not ask you to speculate. We only ask you to watch and to listen. That justice is not a uniform we wear, but the actions we choose when we think no one is watching." Mona Lisa drew a deep breath, feeling the air around her grow lighter. She didn't know what would come next. Old enemies could resurface, new dangers could be lying in wait. But in this moment, she knew she had done the right thing. Above the clouds that hadn't completely cleared, a sliver of blue sky began to emerge. And Mona Lisa, a woman long used to living beneath heavy skies, stood firm. like a steadfast marker that no storm could wash away. The large screen behind Judge Grayson still glowed faintly, reflecting the images of streetlights and blurred figures captured in the video just shown. The courtroom was plunged into absolute silence. No more whispers, no more awkward coughs. The air thickened like a block of concrete, weighing down on every person, every breath. Mona Lisa sat quietly, her hands loosely clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed straight ahead, but inside she knew something had shattered within the hearts of those watching. No loud accusations were needed. They had seen, they had heard, and once the truth is witnessed with one's own eyes, there is no turning away. Benjamin Carter stood and approached the lectern. He didn't need to stir the atmosphere. What he needed now was to let it settle, to allow the shock flooding the room to seep deeper, to take root firmly in the mind of every juror. "Ladies and gentlemen," Benjamin began, his voice calm, "you have just witnessed what the defendant Mona Lisa has been facing alone all this time. A police officer, instead of protecting the truth, chose to destroy evidence deliberately, to conceal it." He paused, his gaze sweeping slowly across the room. "If Officer Simmons hadn't sabotaged his body cam, if the full footage existed, perhaps we wouldn't even need to sit here today." In the jury box, a middle-aged man in a dark gray suit gripped the arm of his chair tightly. The young woman beside him pressed her lips together, her brows furrowed, her eyes burning with anger. No words were needed. The signs were clear. The trust once placed in Simmons' blue uniform was crumbling beyond repair. Mona Lisa silently observed every small movement in the room. She didn't smile. She didn't show triumph, because she knew victory in battles like this wasn't applause, wasn't cheering. It was a quiet but profound awakening, and once it occurred, it changed everything forever. Across the courtroom, the plaintiff's table looked like a deserted fortress. Officer Simmons sat frozen in his chair, his face ashen, his hands rubbing nervously at his knees. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but Simmons only shook his head, his eyes blank, as if he understood all defense efforts now were no more than gathering fallen stones from a collapsed wall. Judge Grayson slowly returned to his seat, banging his gavel 3 times. The sound echoed through the room like funeral bells for what Simmons once thought was untouchable. "The court acknowledges the video evidence as an essential part of the case record," his voice deep but resolute, every word weighted with authority. "We will proceed with closing arguments tomorrow morning." The judge looked up, his gaze sharp as a blade slicing across Simmons. "And the court will consider additional criminal charges regarding evidence tampering." A silent shockwave rippled across the room. Jurors exchanged glances. Some spectators turned to each other, their eyes ablaze with righteous outrage. Outside in the hallway, people passed the news like wildfire. The body cam sabotage had been confirmed. Mona Lisa took a deep breath. She felt her heartbeat steady, calm as a sea after a storm. She wasn't naive enough to believe it was over, but she knew, from this moment forward, the narrative would no longer be dictated by those cloaked in power and lies. As the court adjourned for the day, Mona Lisa rose and walked slowly toward the hallway outside. Benjamin walked beside her, silent, but between them was an unspoken understanding. They had come a long way from that cold interrogation room, through months of enduring suspicion, through every unrelenting confrontation, and now the flame they had kindled in darkness was beginning to cast its light. She paused for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the old wooden railing of the courthouse. Outside, the autumn sunlight had softened, painting the streets in pale gold. A few people stood waiting by the main entrance, their eyes no longer filled with distance or doubt, but with silent respect. Mona Lisa knew the road ahead would still be full of challenges. The old powers would not let her walk in peace so easily, but this time she would not be walking through the dark alone. This time the truth had been seen, and once the truth has been brought into the light, No force can ever push it back into darkness again. The light inside the courtroom dimmed slightly, like a sign that a new storm was forming. As everyone settled back into their seats, Benjamin Carter rose. He didn't charge forward like a fighter unleashed. He moved with measured calm, as if he knew the blade he was about to draw had been sharpened for months. "Your Honor," Benjamin began, his voice ringing out crisp and steady, "we are not only here to present Officer Simmons' misconduct on the night in question, we are here to shine a light on a deeper truth, a pattern of behavior, repeated and protected by those who are supposed to prevent it." He opened a thick file. The rustle of pages sounded loud in the silence, like a whip cracking through the air. Simmons, seated at the prosecution table, looked as pale as paper, his eyes locked onto the documents as if trying to burn them away with sheer force of will. Benjamin lifted the file high and read aloud. A 2016 complaint for excessive force against a Latino man. Internal conclusion, insufficient evidence, no video footage. He flipped a page. In 2018, a young black woman accused Officer Simmons of threatening her with a weapon during a traffic stop. Internal investigation. Simmons cleared of wrongdoing. Another page. In 2019, 3 witnesses reported Simmons using racial slurs during the arrest of an Asian teenager. Result, verbal warning not entered into the formal record. With each incident Benjamin recited, the tension in the room thickened, layer by layer. Each flip of the page cut another deep wound into the rotten wall surrounding Simmons. Some jurors furiously scribbled notes. Others sat frozen, their faces heavy with shock and bottled-up anger. Benjamin paused, his gaze sweeping the room like a cold blade. "But the problem is not just one individual," he said, voice tightening. "The problem is why these complaints, so numerous, so serious, were repeatedly dismissed. Who protected Officer Simmons? Who decided that power mattered more than justice?" He pressed a button on the table. The large screen lit up again, this time displaying an internal report highlighting names. Pettit Police Department, the Internal Disciplinary Board, and shady notes like insufficient grounds, recommend counseling over discipline. The entire courtroom seemed drained of air. People no longer stared at Simmons. They stared at the bigger system, a system that had swallowed justice under piles of paperwork and behind closed-door meetings. Mona Lisa sat tall and still, her eyes cold, watching every small shift. She knew Benjamin wasn't just aiming at Simmons. He had fired the arrow into the heart of the entire rotten machine. The opposing lawyer shot to his feet, objecting, demanding the evidence be thrown out for lack of direct relevance. But Judge Grayson, his face stone cold, tapped his gavel 3 times. "Overruled. Patterns of abusive behavior by a witness are relevant to credibility and truthfulness." The counterstrike was officially allowed, and this time no one in the room could ignore it. Benjamin turned back toward the jury, his voice lower but even stronger. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you are asked to judge not just a single event, but a choice. Will we continue to turn a blind eye, letting those with power twist justice however they please? Or will we expose the truth, even if it forces us to see what we wish we hadn't?" He stepped back, his gaze steady, challenging the entire room to answer. The jury sat silent, each person facing that question inside themselves. An older man leaned on his knee, his eyes reddened. A young woman clasped her hands before her mouth, almost as if in prayer. There was no need for grand speeches anymore. The story had told itself, and each person now carried a piece of it in their heart. Simmons slumped in his seat, his shoulders collapsing like a tower losing its last support beam. No more objections, no more excuses, only a man, stripped bare under the merciless light of truth. As the court recessed to prepare for closing arguments, Mona Lisa rose from her seat. Benjamin gave her a small nod, the nod of comrades who knew the battle wasn't over, but the flag of justice had already begun to catch the wind. Outside, the heavy clouds finally started to break apart, letting through the first streaks of sunlight. And in that light, Mona Lisa stepped into the hallway where the whole city was beginning to hear the truth. The air in the courtroom felt frozen. After all the revelations, after each fragment of truth had been uncovered, the entire room was submerged under a weight too heavy to voice. Now, as Judge Grayson gave a nod, signaling the defense to make their closing statement, every eye turned to Mona Lisa. She rose, each movement slow but resolute, like someone fully aware of the weight carried in each step. Her dark suit was so plain it nearly blended into the worn wooden backdrop of the courtroom, and yet it only made the unyielding spirit radiating from her small, steadfast frame stand out all the more. Without notes, without a lawyer beside her, Mona Lisa walked straight to the podium. The room held its breath. A long, deep silence stretched out before she spoke, her voice not loud, not hurried, but resonating clearly, like a bell tolling deep within every mind present. "I'm not standing here to seek revenge." The first words fell, heavy and clear as gemstones, and the jurors almost instinctively lifted their heads, their eyes weighted with emotions they hadn't yet found names for. Mona Lisa paused, her gaze moving slowly across each face. She didn't accuse, she didn't scold. She simply told her story. Slowly, honestly, a story that had been twisted for too long. "I don't want to see anyone destroyed," she said, her voice dropping low. "I don't want to see anyone dragged through the mud of mistakes they created themselves. I only want the truth and justice, not just for me, but for everyone who, day after day, lives with the fear that their very existence will be judged, trampled, simply because of the color of their skin." A heavy hush swept across the room. In the jury box, an older woman wiped at her eye with the corner of her hand. A young man pressed his lips together, his eyes red but his silence firm. Mona Lisa continued, not shouting, not rallying. "Listen, when I stood under that streetlight that night, I wasn't thinking about lawsuits. I just wanted to go home, like anyone else after a long day, but I became a target, not because of what I did, but because I was there." Her voice remained steady, but each word pierced the room like a quiet needle, slipping past the hardened indifference of those too accustomed to looking past injustice. "I'm standing here," she said, "not to ask for pity. I don't need sympathy. I need respect. I need the truth to be recognized. I need fairness, not based on appearances or assumptions, but on what is right and what is wrong." In that moment, no one saw the defendant. No one saw a black woman. They saw only a person, intact in dignity, steady in her pain, but unwavering in her principles. From behind the defense table, Benjamin Carter watched silently. He knew that all the sharp arguments, all the irrefutable evidence he had presented earlier could not reach the jury's hearts as deeply as the simple, unfiltered words Mona Lisa was speaking now. She wasn't apologizing for her existence. She wasn't begging forgiveness for a crime she didn't commit. She was asking, calmly, firmly, for justice, not just for herself, but for all. Mona Lisa lifted her gaze directly to Judge Grayson. "I believe," she said, "that you can see the truth, and I believe you will do what is right. No long speeches, no rhetorical flourishes, just a simple trust, spoken by someone who had risked everything, her safety, her past, her future, in the name of truth." She gave a small nod to the judge, then turned and walked back to her seat. The entire courtroom remained silent. No one dared to breathe too loudly. No one dared to disturb the sacred stillness that now enveloped the space. As Mona Lisa sat down, Benjamin leaned over and whispered, very softly, "You've done everything you needed to do." She answered only with a faint smile, the smile of someone who knew that, whatever the verdict, she had already won. She had conquered silence and fear. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "The court will recess for jury deliberation," he said, his voice low but firm. "The final decision rests with you." As the jury filed out, the heavy solemnity lingered. A slight breeze slipped through the old wooden doors, carrying the earthy scent of the world outside, a reminder that no matter what, a new season was coming. And in the hearts of those who had sat and witnessed every word, every unshed tear, something had shifted forever. The waiting time in the courtroom dragged on painfully slow, as if every minute stretched into eternity. Mona Lisa sat silently, her hands clasped in front of her chest, eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench. No one in the room spoke loudly. No one scrolled through their phones. No one stared around absent-mindedly. Everyone was simply waiting, waiting for a moment that would decide not just one person's fate, but the fate of a truth that had been buried for far too long. Benjamin Carter sat beside her, not bothering to hide the tension on his face. Though he trusted in the power of the evidence, in the battles they had fought to bring it to light, he still knew. In a courtroom, victory could never be taken for granted, because the truth, no matter how clear, always needed brave hearts to see it. The door behind the jury box swung open. The entire room seemed to hold its breath at once. 12 people, faces that had been strangers but had over these past days become central figures in Mona Lisa's life, entered one by one. They took their seats, stern-faced, each carrying an invisible, crushing weight on their shoulders. Judge Grayson returned, his black robe billowing like a heavy cloud. He nodded at the court clerk. The gray-haired woman stood up, her voice resonating clearly even as she maintained a formal tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, has the jury reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, rose. In his hand was the signed verdict form. His face was expressionless, but in his eyes shimmered a strange light, the light of awakening. "We have reached a verdict," he answered. Judge Grayson nodded for him to proceed. The clerk stepped forward, took the form, and handed it to the judge. A long pause followed before Judge Grayson's voice broke the stillness, slow and certain like distant drums. "Find the charge of resisting a law enforcement officer. The jury finds the defendant not guilty." The room shuddered as if hit by a silent explosion. There was no cheering, no one jumped up to clap, but the silence, profound, trembling, like a collective sigh of souls too long denied justice, was more powerful than any sound. Mona Lisa closed her eyes for a brief moment. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply let the relief seep into every fiber of her being, as if she could finally breathe free air without the taint of suspicion and hostility. Benjamin turned to her, nodding, his eyes shining with unhidden respect. They had made it through the long nights of work, the contemptuous glances in the hallways, the knowing shakes of heads from the system itself, and now they stood on the other side. But the verdict didn't end there. Judge Grayson glanced at another line on the paper, then read on, his voice deeper, like thunder rumbling far off. "The jury further recommends that a criminal investigation be initiated against Officer Bradley Simmons for evidence tampering, abuse of power, and perjury." A second, stronger wave of shock rippled across the room. Spectators froze in place. At the jury box, a few members gripped their chair arms tightly, one of them nodding slightly, as if reaffirming that they had done the right thing. Simmons at the plaintiff's table had no strength left to react. He sat hunched over, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders trembling, whether from rage or fear no one could tell. The power he had once cloaked himself in was now stripped away, leaving nothing but an empty, broken shell. Judge Grayson closed the case file, struck his gavel 3 times sharply, slamming shut the final door on the lies. Court adjourned. Mona Lisa rose. She didn't rush. She walked slowly from the defendant's table, head held high, each step light but firm. The doors before her opened, and the midday sunlight flooded into the courtroom, a long-awaited welcome. In the hallway, reporters, supporters, and anonymous citizens who had followed the trial surrounded her, but there was no chaos, no shouting. They stood back, creating a silent hall of honor for her to walk through. Benjamin followed close behind, his heavy case file now feeling as light as air. He knew the battle against Simmons might be over, but the fight to change the system was far from finished, and he knew the woman walking ahead of him was the flame that would keep lighting that path. Mona Lisa stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, where the warmest sunlight struck. Esther's hands met behind her as she turned and looked back at the building behind her, not with hatred, but with a silent message. Justice is not a place. Justice is the people who dare to stand tall, even when everything around them crumbles. She took a deep breath. An old chapter had closed. A new one had begun, and this time she would not walk into it alone. That autumn, Charleston wore a new coat, not from the golden leaves or the chill sweeping through its old streets, but from a deeper change, something invisible to the eye, yet unmistakably present in the air. A new spirit of justice, a renewed awakening. Mona Lisa stepped out of the courthouse, not just with a verdict of acquittal. She stepped out with a greater responsibility, a silent but steadfast calling that what she had started could not end there. Just a few weeks after the trial concluded, on a quiet afternoon, Mona Lisa held a small press conference at a modest community center deep within a working-class neighborhood. There was no grand stage, no giant banners listing corporate sponsors, only a worn wooden board behind her, simply bearing the name of the new organization. When asked why she chose that name, Mona Lisa only smiled softly. Because from the ashes of injustice, we can build new wings. The Phoenix Foundation was created to provide legal support to victims of false accusations, abuses of power, and discrimination within the justice system. But to Mona Lisa, it wasn't just about paperwork, lawyers, or courtrooms. It was about restoring trust, about reminding ordinary people that they were not alone when standing against a system that often felt untouchable. Mona Lisa did not rest on the newfound fame. She threw herself into the work alongside Benjamin Carter and a small group of dedicated colleagues, building a network of volunteer lawyers, setting up free training classes for the community, and hosting open talks about civil rights every week. She spent at least 3 days personally reviewing cases, listening to stories that mirrored her own. People detained because of prejudice, fired for speaking out, smeared simply for demanding fairness. News of the Phoenix Foundation quickly spread beyond Charleston. Nearby cities, national human rights organizations, and even major media outlets began to take notice. Many called Mona Lisa a symbol of resilience, a new beacon in the pursuit of justice. But whenever someone mentioned such titles, she merely shook her head and said, "I'm no hero. I'm just an ordinary person who refused to stay silent." One Saturday afternoon, Mona Lisa stood before a small class at the Phoenix Center, teaching the right to remain silent and how to handle unjust interrogations. The young people, boys and girls aged 16 to 20, listened intently. She didn't recite hollow textbook lessons. She shared real experiences from freezing nights in holding cells, from tense court confrontations, from standing alone among wolves without bowing. Once, a slim, determined-looking, brown-skinned boy stood up and asked, "Weren't you scared? Standing alone against them?" Mona Lisa smiled, a serene smile that gleamed with endurance. "Of course I was scared. Fear just made me move slower. It didn't stop me." That answer spread through the community like a mantra, from labor neighborhoods to student halls, from formal speeches to sidewalk conversations. The name Mona Lisa, and more importantly, the spirit she represented, became a symbol for a generation that refused to bow. When a major newspaper interviewed her, asking whether she planned to run for public office, Mona Lisa simply laughed and shook her head. "I don't need a seat of power to change the world. I just need to stand firm where I am and help others stand too." That simple sentence, like Mona Lisa herself, was widely quoted across social media, at rallies, and even in law classes discussing civil rights. That winter, a large mural was painted on an old brick wall at the corner of King and Calhoun Streets, the place where not long ago Mona Lisa had once walked alone after her first trial. The mural depicted her standing tall, her face lifted proudly, arms relaxed at her sides, eyes gazing ahead. Below it, just one simple line. Justice begins with one person refusing to bow. And in the sweet chill of year's end, small groups gathered under that mural, not to protest, not to riot, but to remind each other change doesn't begin with a crowd. It begins with one person, just one. Brave enough not to stay silent, Mona Lisa knew this journey would never be easy. There would be threats, smear campaigns, seemingly endless legal battles, but she also knew one thing more certainly than anything else. Once the seed of truth is planted, no force can stop it from growing. And under that clear blue winter sky, as pale sunlight brushed the streets, Mona Lisa walked forward with a smile, not to chase victory, but to continue building a legacy of ordinary people who dared to rise, who dared to demand a more just world for all. On a winter morning when the sunlight was still faint and mist drifted thinly through the old cobblestone streets, Mona Lisa received a strange letter. It had no return address, no postal mark, just a plain white envelope, neatly placed in the crack of the Phoenix Foundation's office door. She picked up the envelope, her fingers brushing the rough texture of the paper, sensing something unusual. A vague instinct flickered. Not fear, but the sharp intuition that had been ingrained in her through years of service under the SEAL uniform. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, unsigned with no trace of origin. The message, typed coldly, was short. A no. The past never sleeps. Get ready. Mona Lisa read it again, slower this time. No flowery language, no overt threat. Yet every word rang clear as an alarm in her mind. She sat down at her desk, placing the paper in front of her. No panic, no anger, just absolute stillness, like the sea before a storm. She had always known this day might come. From the moment she agreed to use Ryan's footage, allowing a piece of her shadowed past to surface, she had steeled herself for the possibility that forces from another world, one she'd tried to leave behind, might come looking again. But what surprised her now was the calmness inside. No betrayal, no despair, just a confirmation. This journey had never been about one trial or one verdict. It was a long war, and she, more than anyone, was ready. Mona Lisa folded the paper neatly and locked it away in a drawer with a firm snap. She told no one, not Benjamin, not anyone on her team, not because she didn't trust them, but because she understood some battles must be faced alone. The rest of the day, Mona Lisa worked as usual. She reviewed the case of a single mother wrongfully targeted for deportation, guided a group of students on their rights when unlawfully detained. She smiled, she listened, she advised, as if no shadow lurked outside the door. But when night fell, when the city was stripped down to flickering streetlights and cold wind threading through narrow alleys, Mona Lisa allowed herself to stop, to face the silent corners of her mind. She stepped onto her apartment's balcony. Charleston, by night, was quiet, profound, the old brick rooftops hunching under a silver crescent moon. She leaned lightly against the railing, letting the icy wind caress her face, blowing away the last lingering heaviness of past months. Memories surged back. Long nights in foreign lands, the staccato of gunfire, screams, the acrid scent of gunpowder mingling with the raw breath of life and death. She remembered comrades who had fallen. She remembered whispered oaths at nameless ceremonies. No one gets left behind. And now standing in the heart of a different kind of battlefield, the fight against silence and injustice. She understood that the oath still held. It had simply transformed. Mona Lisa closed her eyes for a few seconds, feeling the quiet strength rise from deep within. She knew that from this moment on, peace would not come easily. There would be invisible hands reaching from the shadows. There would be battles she could not foresee. But she also knew fear no longer ruled her as it once did, because she had learned courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. A slow smile crossed Mona Lisa's lips. Not wide, not dazzling. She's just a small curve, carrying the weight of unshakable resolve. She opened her eyes, looking toward the far-off horizon, where the night sky had begun to blink with the faint stars of early winter. She didn't know what awaited her ahead, but she knew one thing. No matter who came, no matter what happened, she would never bow her head, never give up. Mona Lisa gripped the cold railing, letting the chill sink into her skin like a living reminder that she was truly alive, alive for what was right, alive for the dreams that others had not yet seen bloom. The night wind caught her scarf and whipped it away into the darkness. But Mona Lisa didn't turn to retrieve it. She stood still, steadfast, her gaze cutting a clear line through the night, unwavering. And somewhere, in the quiet city breathing beneath her, the seeds of a new generation had begun to sprout. A generation that would understand. Sometimes all it takes is one brave soul refusing to be silent to change the world. Mona Lisa's story reminds us, never judge others based on prejudice. A person's appearance can never reveal the full depth of their value or strength. Talent and dignity know no boundaries of skin color, origin, or circumstance. And even when facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles, justice always finds a way, as long as someone has the courage to fight for it until the end. This isn't just a story of one individual standing against an unjust system. It's a reminder for all of us. The truth can be buried in darkness, but it never disappears. All it takes is one person brave enough to light the flame, and that light will spread, igniting hope and change. Have you ever been underestimated because someone didn't truly know you? Have you ever been quietly proving you were far more capable than they thought? If this story made you think, share it so more people can reflect and feel the strength of perseverance. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep following powerful and heart-moving stories.